Lewis Hamilton furious with Charles Leclerc after Leclerc completed his final lap out of time, ruining Hamilton's chances of making it to Q3 at the British Grand Prix. Don't miss Hamilton's explosive reaction at the end. What had been projected as the natural expected conclusion to an already breathtaking and tightly contested qualifying session at Silverstone spiraled into a chaotic, emotionally charged, and entirely unforeseen maelstrom of conflict and animosity, throwing both the Mercedes and Ferrari camps into a state of turmoil and disbelief. In the span of a few unpredictable moments, a seemingly minor deviation in procedure triggered an escalating chain of misunderstandings, confrontations, accusations, and heated verbal altercations, culminating in what insiders are now describing as one of the most explosive and emotionally raw interpersonal breakdowns seen between elite-level Formula One drivers in recent memory. The protagonists at the center of this spiraling storm, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, two of the sport's most recognizable and scrutinized figures, are now locked in what appears to be an irreparable clash of egos, trust, and intentions, the consequences of which may ripple through the paddock, the championship dynamics, and the very fabric of team harmony in ways few could have anticipated. The initial flashpoint emerged during the critical dying moments of Q3, when the intensity and precision required from drivers, strategists, and engineers alike reaches levels of surgical accuracy. At this decisive juncture, when tire compounds need to be within razor-thin thermal margins, power units must be primed for maximum deployment, and track position becomes a matter of milliseconds, Ferrari's meticulously crafted plan was thrown into complete disarray by a single unsanctioned decision. According to multiple leaked radio communications currently being dissected by analysts, technical insiders, and rival teams alike, Leclerc had been explicitly told to abort any attempt at a final flying lap. The rationale behind this instruction, rooted in Ferrari's larger strategy to manage traffic flow and preserve optimal track space for key competitors, including Hamilton, was logical: allow a clean and uninterrupted final push for multiple frontrunners while avoiding a bunch-up that could jeopardize everyone's ultimate performance. And yet, despite this detailed internal directive, Leclerc decided, some say impulsively, others argue defiantly, to ignore the call and initiate a full push lap, catching not only his own garage by surprise but completely derailing the precise run plan being executed by Mercedes, particularly for Hamilton. Positioned directly behind the Ferrari in what was expected to be a well-calculated gap designed for clean air and aerodynamic efficiency, Hamilton was instead met with turbulent airflow, reduced grip, and compromised corner entries that derailed his final sector. The immediate aftermath inside the Mercedes garage was one of visible confusion, with engineers scrambling to understand telemetry anomalies and radio backlogs, trying to piece together what had gone wrong in real time. Hamilton, known for his usually composed demeanor under pressure, could be seen visibly agitated, gesturing animatedly while demanding answers from both his race engineer and strategy director. His tone, initially clipped and professional, gradually escalated to one of incredulity and exasperation as more information surfaced about Leclerc's unexpected behavior. What followed off-track can only be described as incendiary. With the qualifying session barely concluded, Hamilton reportedly confronted Leclerc directly, bypassing formal debriefs and media obligations to seek a face-to-face explanation in the narrow, often chaotic corridor that separates the driver's media areas. Witnesses, including several astonished press officers, junior staffers, and off-duty engineers, have relayed that the encounter rapidly spiraled from terse words into a fiery, profanity-laced exchange, with Hamilton accusing Leclerc of intentionally sabotaging his lap. The British driver allegedly questioned not only the legitimacy of Leclerc's decision but the ethics behind it, suggesting that it was a calculated attempt to destabilize a rival's rhythm at a venue where track position is often pivotal. Leclerc, in response, didn't retreat. He fired back with an equally impassioned defense, calling Hamilton's accusations baseless, driven by ego, and delusional. According to insiders who overheard parts of the confrontation, Leclerc asserted that the decision was based on his own assessment of timing data and his felt sense of tire readiness, claiming he acted with urgency, not malice. Both men reportedly raised their voices to the point where nearby interviews had to be paused, and FIA staff were dispatched to de-escalate the situation before it boiled over further. The incident has since ignited a firestorm of controversy that has engulfed not only the two drivers and their respective teams but the entirety of the Formula One paddock. Team bosses were quickly drawn into emergency discussions, with Mercedes' Toto Wolff demanding a full review of the situation and Ferrari's Frederic Vasseur holding back-to-back strategy debriefs behind closed doors. When pressed for comments, Wolff maintained a tight-lipped demeanor but suggested unacceptable inconsistencies in on-track etiquette had occurred, while Vasseur vaguely attributed the entire ordeal to a timing misalignment. However, the lack of a unified explanation has only fueled rampant speculation, with whispers among senior Paddock personnel suggesting that Leclerc had been growing increasingly frustrated with Ferrari's conservative strategies throughout the season and may have used the moment to reclaim control, regardless of the external consequences. In the media sphere, the story has exploded beyond traditional sports reporting. International outlets from Italy, the UK, France, and Germany are devoting round-the-clock coverage to every detail of the incident. Former world champions turned pundits are split in their interpretations. Some argue Leclerc showed unacceptable disregard for Paddock protocol, while others champion his refusal to bow to strategic passivity. On social media, where opinions morph into movements within minutes, fan camps have become battlefields. Hashtags accusing either side of unsporting behavior, strategic manipulation, or psychological warfare have gone viral, with hashtag Leclercgate and hashtag Hamilton blocked trending globally. Leclerc's personal team was forced to temporarily disable comment sections on his posts due to the influx of abuse and speculation, while Hamilton's cryptic tweet, "Intentions reveal truth," has only deepened the intrigue and reignited the debate. To make matters more complex, both teams are now dealing with potential technical reviews from the FIA. While no official complaint has been lodged as of yet, multiple sources indicate that race stewards have requested access to onboard footage, throttle traces, and positional GPS data from both vehicles to determine whether any unsporting behavior, accidental or otherwise, occurred. Should a formal investigation be launched, it could cast a long shadow over the starting grid, with even the potential for grid penalties or reprimands. The FIA has remained silent on the matter, but the sheer volume of internal chatter suggests that the situation is being taken with the utmost seriousness behind closed doors. Internally, the consequences are already being felt. Mercedes is now reconfiguring its qualifying simulation models to account for unexpected interference scenarios, while Ferrari's pit wall is reportedly under pressure to revisit its internal chain of command after growing indications that Leclerc may no longer be fully aligned with team strategy protocols. Several high-ranking members within the Scuderia's technical unit have expressed unease, suggesting that Leclerc's increasingly unilateral decision-making style is becoming a liability in high-pressure sessions. Meanwhile, Hamilton, who has historically been adept at turning controversy into motivation, was seen holding extended closed-door conversations with his mental performance coach, signaling the psychological impact the incident may be having. Within the wider driver community, whispers of unease are spreading. One top 5 driver, speaking under the condition of anonymity, admitted to feeling uncomfortable about the breakdown in mutual respect among senior figures and raised concerns that the emotional fallout could manifest in overly aggressive maneuvers at race start, particularly if Leclerc and Hamilton line up near each other on the grid. In a sport where fractions of a second separate triumph from disaster and mutual trust plays a key role in safety and performance, such interpersonal volatility between top-tier competitors could create an unstable and dangerous environment not just for them, but for everyone around them. As the paddock braces for what promises to be one of the most tense and emotionally fraught race days of the season, questions linger in every garage, briefing room, and hospitality suite. Was Leclerc's final lap an act of instinctual brilliance, a driver trusting his gut in the chaos of Q3? Or was it a deliberate act of rebellion against team orders with the secondary effect, intended or not, of derailing a rival's final push? Was Hamilton's reaction born purely out of competitive frustration, or does it reflect deeper grievances tied to respect, legacy, and his position within the sport as it continues to evolve? One thing is certain: the emotional damage caused by this episode cannot be undone with a press release or a photo-op handshake. The wounds, psychological and reputational, have already cut deep, and as the championship continues to unfold, the ghosts of this qualifying session will almost certainly linger, hovering like a storm cloud over every corner, chicane, and press conference still to come. Whether propelled by a surge of primal intuition, an overwhelming desire to outperform his rivals, or simply a rebellious refusal to obey orders he no longer trusted, Charles Leclerc made a decision that reshaped the final seconds of qualifying in a way that stunned even the most seasoned observers in the paddock. The voice of his race engineer had cut through the radio waves not once but twice, delivering a direct instruction to hold position and avoid initiating another time attack. This was supposed to be the coordinated strategy, the collective decision made from the pit wall. But Leclerc, feeling either abandoned by prior team strategy calls or consumed by a need to take control of his own fate, chose to override that directive in the most dramatic way possible. He didn't hesitate. He didn't double-check. He simply planted his foot down and surged forward out of copse with a commitment that bordered on recklessness. As his Ferrari rocketed through the fearsome Maggots-Beckett's Chapel sequence, It became instantly clear to anyone watching that this wasn't a cool-down lap. This was a full send, a no-holds-barred push lap commenced with mere seconds left on the clock. There had been no heads-up to the team, no last-minute radio message, no tactical recalibration. It was a solo decision, made in the cockpit, at 300 kilometers per hour. The red car sliced through the iconic Silverstone bends with ferocity, carving through the apexes as if time itself was the enemy. And in doing so, Leclerc shattered the rhythm of every car behind him, each of which had been carefully placed in anticipation of one final, perfectly timed run to conclude the Q3 session. Among those preparing to unleash their decisive laps was Lewis Hamilton, a driver whose name is synonymous with dominance at Silverstone, a man meticulously positioning his Mercedes to launch at the last possible heartbeat of the session. The team had engineered his approach with precision, using simulations, wind data, and sector deltas to optimize every tenth of a second. Hamilton had done his part, staying in the right window, preserving tire temperature, maintaining the gap to the car ahead. But all of that was obliterated in an instant the moment Leclerc chose to accelerate. The unexpected pace of the Ferrari disrupted the domino-like formation of cars. The chain reaction was instant, brutal, and irreversible. Drivers behind began closing in faster than expected. Traffic bottlenecked through the final corners. Strategic spacing collapsed as drivers scrambled to avoid running into each other or overheating their tires in the now compressed pack. Hamilton, stuck between slower cars trying to build gaps and faster ones trying to get by, found himself in an impossible scenario. His rhythm was destroyed, his gap disappeared, and his tire temperature, so delicately managed, began to drift out of the performance window. As he approached the final few turns, his engineer urged him to push, but the message was drowned out by the ticking of the clock. The seconds vanished faster than the space between the cars. As Hamilton exited the last corner, it was already too late. The digital countdown struck 0. The start-finish line came and went. His final lap attempt, which had been painstakingly planned for the entire session, was rendered void before it even began. Inside the Mercedes garage, silence fell like a curtain. Engineers stared at screens with a mixture of disbelief and suppressed rage. And then came Hamilton. His car rolled to a halt in the pit lane. He didn't wait for team personnel to greet him. He climbed out of the cockpit with the calm exterior of a man containing a storm. His helmet remained on, hiding his expression, but his every motion betrayed the fury coursing through him. He ripped out his communication gear, tossed it with sharp disdain to the floor, and marched straight past the debrief area. Cameras caught a brief glance, a fixed stare toward the Ferrari pit box, where Leclerc's lap time blinked mockingly on the timing screen. What happened in the moments after has already entered the lore of the 2025 season. Behind the scenes, Hamilton reportedly confronted senior figures within his own team, demanding clarity on how this scenario had not been anticipated or prevented. His words were direct, forceful, and laced with frustration not only at the incident but at a broader pattern of missed chances. The conversation escalated into an intense exchange between Hamilton and his race engineer, Peter Bonington, as the seven-time champion struggled to comprehend how Leclerc's move had caught everyone off guard. The realization that Ferrari had provided no signal, no indication that Leclerc was about to defy the run plan, only deepened the sting. It wasn't just a matter of misfortune, it felt like sabotage cloaked in spontaneity. Across the paddock, murmurs spread like wildfire. Engineers from other teams gathered in hushed huddles, watching replays and dissecting radio traffic. Analysts pointed to the tight telemetry data that showed exactly when the pack dynamics began to fracture. On social media, fans exploded with speculation, some accusing Leclerc of recklessness, others praising his audacity. But within the inner circles of the teams, there was far less ambiguity. Leclerc's last-minute dash hadn't just thrown a wrench into Q3, it had violated the unwritten code that holds the entire final qualifying segment together. Teams rely on order. Drivers depend on spacing. When one piece of that fragile choreography goes rogue, it threatens to unravel the entire dance. Leclerc, for his part, seemed unshaken. After stepping out of the car, he gave a casual nod to his crew and offered vague explanations to the press. He spoke about feeling the moment and taking the opportunity, but avoided direct comments about whether he had ignored team instructions. His body language was composed, his demeanor relaxed, as if unaware or uninterested in the storm he had just triggered. But inside the Ferrari garage, the mood was more tense. Sources close to the team indicated that Leclerc's relationship with his engineer had reached a boiling point in recent races. Disagreements over strategy calls, mistrust over pace decisions, and a growing sense of alienation had reportedly left Leclerc feeling isolated in moments of pressure. This lap, then, may have been more than just a bold move. It may have been a deliberate signal that he would no longer be micromanaged from the pit wall. Hamilton's response in the post-session interviews was a masterclass in veiled fury. With every syllable measured and every pause loaded with meaning, he chose his words with surgical precision. He didn't name names, but the target of his frustration was unmistakable. In this sport, he said, eyes narrowed behind dark sunglasses, we depend on trust, not just within our own teams but across the grid. When someone decides their lap is more important than the collective flow, it affects all of us. It's disappointing. I expected more. Reporters pressed him for specifics, but he declined. Still, the message was received loud and clear, not just by fans, but by every driver, engineer, and team principal in the paddock. As the dust settled, a broader conversation began to take shape, one about how much freedom drivers should be allowed in the final minutes of qualifying, and whether additional regulations or penalties should be introduced for uncoordinated last-second lap attempts. Team bosses like Toto Wolff called for serious review, while Fred Vasseur brushed off criticism by claiming that drivers must sometimes make instinctive decisions. But behind those PR statements was a growing concern that what happened in Silverstone could easily happen again, with even more disastrous consequences. At the speed these cars move, a disrupted final sector isn't just a matter of lost lap time. It's a safety issue, a fairness issue, and now, a flashpoint of controversy between two of the most high-profile drivers on the grid. Internally, Mercedes continued to review their systems. Meetings stretched long into the evening, as strategists looked for ways to prevent similar incidents in the future. But no system could have predicted what Leclerc did, because it was a human decision, made in defiance of every protocol. It wasn't an algorithm that failed. It was trust that fractured. And when trust breaks at 200 miles per hour, the consequences ripple far beyond a single session. As Saturday night fell on Silverstone, the paddock buzzed with quiet tension. Rivalries that had been simmering were now boiling. Alliances were fraying. And Sunday's race, already promising to be dramatic, had taken on a new intensity. Because now, it wasn't just about speed. It was about respect, revenge, and the question everyone was silently asking: what will Hamilton do in response when the lights go out? Without exchanging a single glance or uttering even the briefest word to his pit crew, Lewis Hamilton removed himself from the cockpit with an abruptness that stunned everyone inside the Mercedes garage. His body language was explosive, shoulders tense, movements sharp, strides purposeful. Still wearing his helmet, with the visor halfway down and his racing gloves clenched into fists, Hamilton walked past his team as if they were invisible. There was no acknowledgement of the engineers rushing toward him with data sheets or of the mechanics gesturing helplessly, attempting to debrief the aborted qualifying session. He didn't break pace. He didn't pause. He had a destination locked in his mind, and nothing, not even protocol or paddock etiquette, was going to stop him from reaching it. While the garage buzzed with confusion and murmurs, Mercedes team radio recordings captured snippets of Toto Wolff's increasingly anxious voice trying to reach his star driver. "Lewis, let's regroup. Don't do anything now," came one clipped message. Peter Bonington, usually calm and composed, followed up, "Box now, mate, we can go over this, we'll figure it out." But Hamilton was beyond persuasion. The radios might as well have been off. He neither slowed nor looked back. His entire being was laser-focused on the scarlet-colored motorhome sitting across the paddock, Ferrari's hospitality zone. As he made his way past the media pen and the television crews setting up post-qualifying interviews, everyone turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Reporters stared. Team members from Alpine and McLaren stepped aside instinctively. One Alfa Romeo engineer was later overheard saying, "I've never seen Hamilton like that." He wasn't walking, he was charging, like something had snapped. The weight of Hamilton's fury was so visible that the very atmosphere around him shifted. Security personnel stationed along the paddock corridor exchanged nervous glances, uncertain whether to intervene. But it was already too late. He reached the Ferrari compound without hesitation, bypassing the perimeter as if it were his own. A startled security guard, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected intrusion, moved to block him, but Hamilton brushed past without even a word, his arm sweeping the man aside with startling force. The guard, stunned, didn't pursue. Moments later, Hamilton stormed through the entrance of the Ferrari lounge, drawing immediate gasps from those inside. Conversations ceased. Espresso cups froze mid-air. No one, not even the highest-level VIPs who occasionally drifted into these sanctums, dared interrupt what was unfolding. At that moment, Charles Leclerc was seated at a small round table, surrounded by team principal Frédéric Vasseur and Ferrari's head of performance strategy. They were mid-discussion about qualifying sector data when the air shifted. Leclerc looked up, just in time to see Hamilton striding in with fire behind his eyes. Before anyone could react, Lewis raised his voice, no longer restrained, no longer diplomatic. "You ruined everything out there," he bellowed. "That lap was mine, you knew it. We agreed on the order. You weren't supposed to push. You knew damn well what you did." His voice echoed through the suite, drawing stunned silence from everyone within earshot. Leclerc, visibly shocked by the sudden confrontation, stood up slowly but didn't back down. He was taken aback, yes, but he wasn't about to fold. "I don't answer to you, Lewis," he shot back with a controlled but firm tone. "I saw the space, I had the grip, I made the move. I'm not going to throw away a flying lap because it doesn't suit your plan." It wasn't just a disagreement. It was a clash of philosophies, between one driver who believed in mutual strategy and another who believed in seizing every inch of advantage, no matter the pre-session agreements. The argument escalated rapidly. Hamilton moved closer, closing the distance between them to just inches, his voice now edged with both disbelief and suppressed rage. "You sabotaged my run. You acted like you were out there alone. That was deliberate," he accused. Leclerc's expression darkened as he threw his hands up in frustration. "Deliberate? Are you serious? I was chasing green sectors. I didn't even know where you were on the track. I raced, like I always do. That's what we're here for." Ferrari personnel began stepping in, trying to defuse the growing storm. A junior press officer reached toward Hamilton cautiously, only to be nudged aside as the British driver brushed past her. Leclerc's race engineer arrived moments later, attempting to mediate, but by then the atmosphere was at boiling point. The two men, inches apart, were now shouting over each other. Accusations, justifications, disbelief, all tangled into a blur of adrenaline and bitterness. Outside the lounge, members of the FIA security team had already begun gathering. Messages had been exchanged between team managers. Mercedes personnel were seen crossing the paddock hurriedly, no doubt sent by Toto Wolff to contain the fallout. Meanwhile, inside, Vasseur had lost all composure. He slammed a binder of telemetry printouts onto the table and pointed toward his engineering chief. "We told him to hold position," he barked, rage etched into every word. What the hell was he thinking? Back in the main area of the Ferrari suite, the shouting match was finally disrupted when two FIA officials stepped between the drivers and firmly separated them. Hamilton, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, looked ready to continue, but one official placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Leclerc was ushered away in the opposite direction, flanked by Ferrari engineers and still fuming, muttering something inaudible but clearly furious. The confrontation, while falling short of physical violence, had crossed an emotional line that both men, and the entire paddock, would not soon forget. Within minutes, whispers turned into headlines. Journalists scrambled to tweet the incident. Team radio transcripts from Q3 began circulating, confirming that a tow agreement between the drivers had indeed been in place, and that Leclerc's unexpected push had dismantled Hamilton's lap just as he was building up momentum. On social media, hashtags like #HamiltonLeclerc and #QualiClash began trending. Fan debates exploded. Some defended Hamilton's outrage, calling it the reaction of a champion denied his rightful shot. Others argued Leclerc had done what any racer would do, seize an opportunity in a high-stakes session with grid position on the line. Neither driver returned to their respective hospitality areas for some time. Hamilton was eventually seen entering the Mercedes motorhome, flanked by senior team officials and visibly brooding. He avoided all press. No interview. No explanation. Just a gloved hand raised in dismissal before the doors closed behind him. Leclerc, meanwhile, re-emerged nearly 40 minutes later to give a curt, carefully worded interview. "I raced on instinct. I wasn't told to back off. I saw the track open up in front of me, and I went for it. I stand by that decision," he said, voice calm but steely. Backstage, teams were already discussing potential FIA interventions. Not necessarily for rule violations, but for behavior unbecoming of representatives of the sport. There was talk of summoning both drivers for a behind-closed-doors discussion before the race. Even seasoned Paddock veterans admitted they hadn't seen this level of open hostility since the height of the Prost-Senna rivalry. What makes this situation even more volatile is the context: a championship hanging in the balance, strategic alliances collapsing, and the psychological warfare between rivals intensifying with each session. The clash didn't just reflect a disagreement over track etiquette, it unveiled a deeper conflict. A generational clash of values. A war between experience and instinct. Between methodical planning and opportunistic risk. Between a multi-time world champion and a young lion unafraid to challenge icons. And in the high-octane world of Formula One, that volatile mix may be just the beginning of a long and bitter feud that will continue to define the season. The uproar that has engulfed the Formula One world in the aftermath of the dramatic and contentious conclusion to Q3 has reached levels few anticipated. What many initially dismissed as an ambiguous moment of track positioning has transformed into a multifaceted and deeply polarizing scandal, threatening to unravel not just the competitive equilibrium of a single Grand Prix, but the very foundation of trust that sustains the sport at its core. At the epicenter of this storm is Charles Leclerc, whose decision to act outside the bounds of team strategy has ignited tensions across paddocks, boardrooms, and fan communities alike. Mercedes-AMG, the German powerhouse renowned for its precision and discipline, has taken an unprecedented step by lodging a formal grievance with the FIA, calling for a detailed reassessment of the circumstances surrounding the final seconds of qualifying. The team's engineers and data analysts are convinced that the synchronization of session timing was interfered with in a way that cannot be attributed to mere coincidence or organic racing fluctuations. According to confidential sources within the Brackley-based outfit, Leclerc's unexpected behavior introduced anomalies in track rhythm and sector spacing that distorted the lap timing windows for several competitors, potentially altering the final grid in ways that go beyond simple racing luck or misjudgment. Mercedes has presented fragments of telemetry suggesting abrupt deceleration from Leclerc at key corners and a suspiciously erratic delta in his outlap, all of which have been flagged as potentially intentional acts of obstruction rather than circumstantial racing incidents. On the other side of the controversy, Scuderia Ferrari is facing a crisis of its own. While there has been no public reprimand of Leclerc by the team's senior leadership, several individuals intimately involved in the team's strategic operations have leaked fragments of internal communication, revealing that the Monégasque driver acted contrary to explicit pre-session instructions. The carefully constructed qualifying plan, which had been designed over several simulator sessions and briefing meetings, emphasized precise timing for the slipstream effect and avoidance of heavy traffic during final runs. It now appears that Leclerc, driven either by instinct, mistrust in the strategy, or personal ambition, decided to override his team's commands in a split-second judgment call. Engineers and pit wall staff reportedly expressed dismay over the radio, attempting to reach him before he fully committed to the maneuver that would ultimately compromise the final attempts of multiple front-running drivers. Lewis Hamilton, the sport's most decorated driver and a figure whose words carry immense weight, broke from his usual diplomatic tone to deliver a scathing and emotionally charged statement after stepping out of the car. With his body language exuding frustration and disbelief, he declared to assembled journalists, "There are rules we don't write down, but we all respect. You don't sabotage the field to gain an edge. I've been in this game long enough to know the difference between error and intent. That wasn't clumsy. That was deliberate." His words reverberated through the media and digital spaces almost instantly, catalyzing a tidal wave of reactions. Analysts quickly dissected his comments, many interpreting them as a direct accusation of sportsmanship betrayal, while others noted that Hamilton, typically restrained in such moments, must have felt personally violated by the chain of events. Charles Leclerc, appearing markedly calmer in contrast, addressed the media without evasion, but also without remorse. He simply stated, "From where I was sitting, I saw the dynamics unfold and made a choice I believed was necessary. I'm responsible for that, and I accept whatever comes with it." His tone, composed yet unapologetic, was interpreted differently by various commentators. Some lauded him for his composure under pressure, while others chastised him for failing to acknowledge the broader consequences of his actions. Several drivers, off the record, expressed discontent that Leclerc did not take full accountability, with one reportedly describing his stance as recklessly indifferent. Across social networks, the controversy has detonated like a bomb. Thousands of fans have taken to platforms like X, TikTok, and YouTube to post their takes, with hashtags like #LeclercGate, #HamiltonDeservesJustice, and #F1 Code of Honor dominating trending charts worldwide. Longtime followers of the sport find themselves bitterly divided, with impassioned debates erupting over whether Leclerc's decision represented the bold spontaneity of a true racing gladiator or the calculated selfishness of a driver willing to jeopardize others to advance his own prospects. Memes, slow-motion footage breakdowns, and side-by-side onboard comparisons have gone viral, further fueling the fire. Prominent content creators and influencers in the F1 community have released hour-long reaction videos dissecting the scenario frame by frame, sparking further engagement and polarizing commentary threads. Former world champions and seasoned voices in the sport have weighed in with sharp analysis and even sharper criticism. Nico Rosberg, a man intimately familiar with intra-team friction and mental gamesmanship, described the incident during a live panel as a fundamental violation of the trust ecosystem that binds drivers together in this high-stakes arena. Jenson Button, ever the cool-headed observer, added that while Leclerc might have believed he was being clever, he's probably just alienated key allies. Drivers don't forget these things, and neither do their teams. Their remarks struck a chord with fans and insiders alike, adding a layer of legacy and long-term consequences to what might otherwise be dismissed as a momentary lapse or aggressive move. The FIA, under mounting pressure from both teams and fans, has initiated a comprehensive probe into the incident. Investigators are meticulously reviewing timing data, car telemetry, sector differentials, and all available radio transcripts from both Ferrari and other affected teams. The review process, according to insiders, will also include consultations with other drivers whose laps were ruined or compromised, potentially giving them a chance to formally register grievances. There is growing anticipation that the outcome of this investigation may not only determine penalties or reversals in classification, but could also trigger amendments to the sporting regulations themselves, particularly concerning ambiguous behaviors in qualifying that, while not explicitly illegal, are widely seen as undermining the spirit of fair play. The internal dynamics within Ferrari are reportedly strained. Although team principal Frédéric Vasseur continues to maintain a facade of unity in public appearances, whispers from within the Italian team suggest that a significant faction among the technical staff is growing increasingly wary of Leclerc's unpredictability. Some voices are calling for stricter enforcement of hierarchical discipline, warning that repeated instances of freelance decision-making could fracture team chemistry, especially during high-pressure moments. Meanwhile, Carlos Sainz, often overshadowed by Leclerc in terms of media attention, has remained silent, though some speculate that the incident might elevate his standing as a more stable and team-oriented alternative should future lineup reshuffles be considered. Behind closed doors, other teams are actively engaging in strategic discussions. There are credible reports that senior figures from Red Bull, McLaren, Aston Martin, and Mercedes have exchanged preliminary thoughts on issuing a joint statement calling for rule clarification and preventive mechanisms to safeguard the integrity of future qualifying sessions. Some even advocate for the introduction of new GPS-based triggers that automatically monitor intent in lap delta changes, to eliminate gray zones that allow such controversial tactics to go unpunished. In broader terms, this saga is more than just a controversial moment on track. It's a flashpoint that exposes the underlying fragility of driver-team relations, the inadequacy of existing regulatory frameworks to handle nuanced sportsmanship breaches, and the intense emotional stakes that define Formula One's ultra-competitive ecosystem. Every second of Q3 is now being replayed endlessly, not just by fans, but by decision-makers whose verdicts may reshape protocols for seasons to come. The next steps taken, by the FIA, by Ferrari, and by Leclerc himself, will determine whether this becomes a mere footnote in racing history or the catalyst for one of the most consequential regulatory and cultural shifts the sport has ever seen. What started as a whisper behind the scenes has now escalated into a full-blown internal rupture within Ferrari, one that can no longer be denied or brushed aside with carefully worded press releases. The Scuderia, long known for its passion, tradition, and emotional intensity, now finds itself at a crossroads that could define not just this season, but the next phase of its identity. Behind the closed doors of the paddock, tensions are boiling over, not just between the two drivers who wear the red overalls, but also among the engineers, strategists, and senior figures who shape the decisions behind the pit wall. A sizable faction within the Ferrari garage appears to be rallying behind Charles Leclerc, not necessarily out of defiance, but perhaps out of accumulated frustration. These individuals, technicians who've witnessed the mental strain on Leclerc weekend after weekend, believe that what happened wasn't an act of rebellion, but a calculated move born out of necessity. They argue that too many times, the Monégasque driver has been on the receiving end of flawed calls, indecisive strategies, or miscommunications that have cost him dearly, not just podiums, but confidence, momentum, and morale. For them, Leclerc stepping outside the script was not about undermining authority, but about reclaiming control in a sport where hesitation often translates to defeat. His refusal to blindly follow an order that he believed compromised his race was seen by this group as a bold assertion of a driver unwilling to be a passive pawn any longer. On the opposite side, there remains a significant group of team insiders who are deeply concerned, if not outright outraged, by Leclerc's unilateral decision-making during the heat of battle. For them, his actions struck at the very heart of what it means to operate as a unified race team. They see this not as a one-off miscommunication, but as a worrying signal that the cohesion and mutual trust between driver and team may be unraveling. These individuals point out that Ferrari's DNA is rooted in collaboration, discipline, and respect for hierarchy. They worry that if a top driver begins to regularly override instructions, it could open the door to chaos, setting a precedent that other drivers, or even rival teams, could exploit. This isn't just about strategy anymore, it's about control, structure, and whether Ferrari still functions as a single synchronized entity. What complicates matters even further is that this internal civil war is playing out in the glaring spotlight of one of the most emotionally charged races of the season, the British Grand Prix. Silverstone, a track drenched in heritage and adrenaline, is now hosting not just a race, but a high-stakes psychological drama that has gripped fans, media, and insiders alike. Every team meeting is now a potential flashpoint. Every glance exchanged in the Ferrari garage carries an unspoken weight. Every sentence uttered in interviews is being dissected for hidden meaning. The emotional temperature has risen so sharply that even veteran staff members are privately describing the atmosphere as combustible. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton, arguably the most seasoned and calculated driver on the grid, is dealing with his own storm. Denied a proper qualifying position due to a puzzling breakdown in communication from within his own team, the seven-time world champion now finds himself starting farther back than he believes he should. His frustration, though not overtly expressed in interviews, is unmistakable to those who know how to read the subtle signs, the clipped answers, the tight facial expressions, the quiet nods of disapproval. Hamilton is a master at transforming anger into focus, and sources close to his camp suggest that he is entering tomorrow's race with a very clear target, not just to gain positions, but to prove a point. This isn't about salvaging points anymore, it's about reclaiming authority, reputation, and competitive dignity. For Leclerc, the situation is arguably even more treacherous. Beyond the external competition he must face on track, he now has to grapple with the intense scrutiny from within his own squad. The team that once rallied around him as the future face of Ferrari is now split, perhaps irrevocably. There are murmurs that some senior voices in the team are calling for a re-evaluation of roles and responsibilities. Internal debriefs have reportedly turned tense, even confrontational. Trust, that invisible thread that connects a driver to the team shouting instructions into his ear at 300 km per hour, may now be fraying. And in Formula One, once that thread is broken, the consequences are rarely subtle or reparable. The psychological implications are impossible to overstate. Formula One is a battleground of minds just as much as machines, and when mental equilibrium is disturbed, performance tends to suffer in unpredictable ways. Tomorrow's race won't merely be a contest of speed and skill, it will be a pressure cooker of emotional volatility, strategic ambiguity, and personal vendettas simmering just below the surface. Every overtake will carry symbolic weight. Every pit stop will be loaded with underlying tension. Every radio message could either heal wounds or deepen divides. There will be no neutral ground, not in the garage, not in the paddock, and certainly not on the tarmac. The media, of course, has latched onto the narrative with relentless fervor. Headlines are now focused less on lap times and tire choices, and more on body language, rumors of team meetings behind locked doors, and social media interactions, or the conspicuous absence thereof. The fandom is equally polarized. Some are hailing Leclerc as a hero for taking control of his own destiny. Others accuse him of endangering team spirit in a sport that depends on unity under pressure. Debate rages across every corner of the internet, fueled by leaked snippets, selective quotes, and wild speculation about who said what and when. And then, looming over everything like a dark cloud, is the question no one dares to voice publicly but everyone is silently contemplating. Are we witnessing the first cracks in the foundation of Ferrari's future? Is this the inflection point that ultimately leads Leclerc to re-evaluate his long-term place within the team? Could this drama sow the seeds for an eventual departure? Conversely, will this chaos be the spark that reignites Hamilton's drive to pursue alternative options? either to solidify his legacy elsewhere or to rebuild in a new environment. The F1 grid is notoriously volatile, and what begins as a conflict of egos can easily escalate into contract negotiations, surprise announcements, and career-altering moves. Silverstone was supposed to be a celebration, a return to tradition, a showcase of excellence, a tribute to the legacy of motorsport. But what has unfolded is something far more primal and unforgettable, a raw, unfiltered exhibition of human conflict under the most intense spotlight in racing. The sleek veneer of professionalism has cracked, revealing emotions that can't be managed by press officers or buried under corporate statements. This isn't just about Ferrari or Mercedes. It's not merely a team crisis or a strategy mishap. It's a rare, visceral moment in Formula One where the sport stops being a game of machines and becomes a stage for deeply personal stakes. As the engines roar to life tomorrow, and the lights go out, it won't just be a race. It will be a battle for redemption, validation, and psychological survival. And the consequences, both immediate and long-term, may ripple through the championship and the history books for years to come.